My Lords.
Sorry. My Lords, Amendment 78 is about one part of service charges that sometimes gets neglected, and that's the lack of consultation about specifically major works that remain uncapped, opaque and difficult to challenge. This mainly affects those who have bought homes where the landlord or freeholder is a council, and the failure, and the amendment's also about the failure of attempts by the law to help them in the past, and whether we can use this bill to rectify that. During last Wednesday's committee, there was an inference that leaseholders are mainly wealthy homeowners of luxury flats. But to note, these leaseholders do deserve fair treatment, however wealthy they are, and they should not be ripped off. But still, many leaseholders do not fall into that category. 49% of leaseholders are first-time buyers. And of course, we have right to buy leaseholders who bought their own council homes, or there are those leaseholders who bought former council homes because they are cheaper, and that's how home ownership was within their grasp, rather than being priced out of the market. And I declare an interest as being one of those people. But these leaseholders living in former council homes now face enormous refurbishment bills of tens of thousands of pounds, despite a legal cap being introduced 10 years ago, which is being circumvented by local authorities. The reason for major works is no doubt exacerbated by years of weak investment and cuts, and social housing estates do need to be maintained, and I understand the councils have difficulty doing that. But neglect builds up, and leaseholders end up being the ones who pay the price. The bill for entire blocks is divided between the local authority and individual and individual leaseholders, because of course council tenants can't be charged. So then we end up in a situation like one couple, George and Elmer, who were suddenly landed with a £45,000 bill for windows and the roof of the estate, which were not even going to affect them, which, as they said, made them sick with worry. And this disrepair that's accumulated on estates, which has already been discussed, ends up not just increasing service charges, but, as I say, coming as one large lump bill. And indeed, George, of George and Elmer fame, said, "I pay a service charge and I've not seen any work being done on a yearly basis, and then suddenly we get this big bill." I am a Haringey leaseholder of a maisonette, and so I was particularly noted one extreme case that came to light during lockdown, when 76 leaseholders in Wood Green were told to find between £56,000 and £118,000 to cover Haringey repairs and improvements. One young woman, when she bought her maisonette in 2015, was told that major works planned would be £15,000. Instead, after losing her job and because of lockdown, she ended up with a bill during lockdown of £110,000. Another couple, when buying their property, were told of an estimated bill for major works of £12,500. Mid completing buying their house, that had swelled to £25,000, with no explanation whatsoever for the increase, and they couldn't find out why. And then there was a stalling for 5 years, again with no explanation. And then Haringey added in some of the major works, roofs, windows, door replacements. And so now their final bill is a whopping £108,450. And to quote them, "We will be ruined." The bill will be a third of what they paid for their home. And this is happening all over London. And I'm afraid that Council's response to this has been complacent. If I can just quote Lambeth Council, they said, "We appreciate major works can place a financial burden on leaseholders, which is why we offer a number of repayment options. But even repayment options that break it down over, for example, 5 years, one of the options that's available, can almost double some people's mortgage. And this is even beyond increasing service charges." So what's frustrating about all this is that the shocking problem has been known about, and indeed legislators tackled it 10 years ago. In 2014, the Community Secretary at the time, the now noble Lord Pickles, introduced Florrie's Law, named after the pensioner Florence Bourne, who was mortified by a £50,000 repair bill from her local authority landlord, panicked about the noisy works, which, and this is key, a tribunal later ruled those works were completely unnecessary. And sadly, Florence Bourne died of a heart attack. Flory's law then introduced a £15,000 cap on major works in London, £10,000 outside, over a 5-year period. But it only applies if central government money is involved. And guess what? There hasn't been much central government money involved in helping councils on with their social housing stock. So it's not clear at all whether even Flory's law has ever been used, but I would like the Minister to look into a dormant law that was meant to tackle a problem that is still going on. What specifically this amendment seeks to deal with is a narrower matter, and that is that local authority leaseholders are completely shut out of any consultation about these major works. Unlike leaseholders in privately owned buildings, local authority leaseholders have no right to decide on the scope or timing of proposed works or to request alternative quotes from contractors. They only have the right to make observations on plans. And we local authority leaseholders live in dread of a series of letters with estimates for the next high capital expenditure, often for works that don't directly improve our own home, sometimes even our own block. And we can't do anything but just sit in fear of the final bill and know that it won't be value for money. Most council landlords use qualifying long-term agreements with contractors. They are not required by law to find alternative quotations, and with only one tender, there is no incentive to complete on price. Worse, contractors often use their own surveyors to determine the scope of works and costings, and costs can be inflated, works carried out often not essential, there can be shoddy workmanship, poorly fitted windows, leaks in new roofs and so on, but local authority leaseholders have no say and are forced to foot the bill for substantial work. There's a huge amount of waste and sloth and lack of accountability, as I realised when I was evicted from my own block of flat after fire and water had caused damage to our block, and it took 3 years for us to be returned to that block, with so much public money squandered, and of course that is now being recouped from other leaseholders in the local area and indeed from us ourselves. Leaseholders are the very people who care enough to ensure that major works are efficient, high standard and so on. The council actually has no interest in controlling costs if indeed leaseholders cover the bill. And that's why proper consultation called for in this amendment would improve the situation. But again, this has already been tackled by legislators before us. And in the 2002 Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Act, they wanted to ensure that proper consultation on major works was actually introduced into the law. It was part of a drive to provide leaseholders with transparency back then, so that they would have the opportunity to influence the cost of a project and input into who would get the contract. Unfortunately, in 2013, the Supreme Court thwarted the will of Parliament back then by introducing a key provision, by undermining a key provision often referred to as the Dejan ruling, based on Dejan versus Benson court case. And this means that now freeholders can push through major works by calling them an emergency or by filing what's called an S202A order, which tribunals, since the Dejan ruling, generally nod through. This lack of leaseholder consultation on major works means that freeholders almost always have carte blanche to choose what works need doing and determine their cost. As Professor Sue Bright of the University of Oxford writes, quote, "With leasehold reform as a political priority, it is a good moment to reflect on the Supreme Court decisions in Dejan. Professor Bright also notes this lack of consultation goes against the spirit of the Building Safety Act and the Hackett Review that tried to address the problem that residents needed more opportunities to have a strong say and voice and offer their views in decision-making processes. And that's why both Barry Gardner MP and Matthew Pennycock MP raised the problem of the Dejan ruling in the other place. The Housing Minister Lee Rowling admitted in the other place that he didn't know about Dejan, but promised to look into the problem and come back to Parliament. So maybe the Minister can respond to this here and we can actually get on with ensuring that Parliament's will in 2002 actually happens. I do think that all this amendment is trying to do is to restore the intention of Section 20 Major Works regime in the 2002 Act as it was intended before the Supreme Court's unhelpful intervention. And I do hope the Minister will help ensure that that occurs.